My dad pressed the clippers to my skull and laughed. The sound is bright and careless in a room that smells like turkey and pine, too pleased for what he is doing to his adult daughter on Christmas morning. The tree glows. The game hums on the TV. I am in a kitchen chair in the middle of the living room, like a prop. My mom stands at the sink, rinsing a clean plate. My younger brother Dylan is on his phone, eyes flicking up only when hair starts to fall. No one says a word. The clippers buzz hot against my scalp as my dad leans close. You think a Navy uniform makes you someone. In this house, you are just my disobedient girl. Sit still. Marines do not cry over hair. A lock slides off my shoulder and lands on the old Christmas rug, dark strands across faded snowmen. He tips my head forward with 2 fingers. The blades scrape a path down the center of my head, and air hits skin that has never been bare. My eyes burn, but I keep them fixed on the black glass of the TV. In the reflection, I do not see Lieutenant Cara Dalton. I see the teenager who did push-ups on concrete for talking back. The girl whose hair was hacked off in the garage the first time she said no. My mom's shoulders lift and fall. Dylan lets out a tiny laugh and swallows it when my dad glances over. No one says stop. My dad chuckles near my ear. See, this is what made you tough. Not those computers you play with on base. Real discipline. I taste metal at the back of my throat. Last month, I briefed a small SEAL team in a windowless room in Coronado. I pointed at a map and told them which road was safe. They listened and called me ma'am. One of them came home because of it. My dad does not know that. To him, I push keys and pretend. Sit up straight, he orders, lifting my chin so he can clean the line around my ears. You come into my house like you know better than the man who made you. I am fixing that. I want to say, you did not make me. You just gave me something to push against. Instead, I lock my jaw. Another sheet of hair slides away. It is not the hair that hurts. It is the way he makes my world smaller with every pass of the clippers. When he is done, he snaps them off and pats my bare scalp like he has tightened a loose bolt. There you go, he says. Now you remember where you came from. He lifts his phone and takes a picture without asking. Mom, come see Cara, he calls. Light like this is a joke. Linda peeks around the doorway, eyes skimming over my head and away. It will grow back, she whispers. I stand up, hair drifting from my shoulders, and my own voice surprises me with how steady it is. I need to get back to base. My dad snorts. On Christmas? Your Navy can wait 1 night. My commanding officer cannot, I say, close enough to true, and reach for my coat. No one stops me. Outside, the Escondido air is cold against the new exposed skin. I touch the rough stubble, and my stomach flips. I let this happen again. Under the shame, something heavier settles. Not panic, but a quiet decision, like the sky just before a storm front hits. On the drive back to Coronado, the radio plays carols I do not hear. All I see is my dad's satisfied smile and the pile of hair on the rug. What he does not know is that last month, a SEAL team took orders from me. Not about chores or attitude, about who came home. The next morning, the fluorescent lights in a small briefing room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado feel harsh after the soft glow of the tree. I pull off my knit cap before anyone else arrives, wanting to get the looks over with. In the reflection of the wall screen, I look like a recruit and a stranger, buzz cut and uniform and tired eyes. The door opens behind me. Chief Mason Cole steps in with a tablet under his arm, already scanning for maps and weather. His eyes find my head and stop. For a moment, he just stands there. The silence is louder than the clippers were. Who did that to you, ma'am? He asks at last. No joke, no smile, just a quiet question that lands heavy. My father, I say. He called it a gift. Mason studies me like a report. Then he sets the tablet down on the table with slow, deliberate care, his jaw tightening in a way I have only seen right before a mission goes live. Ma'am, he says, I have a plan. Something shifts in my chest when he says it. I have spent years using my rank and my brain to protect people I barely know from danger they never see. For the first time, the people under my command are about to protect me from the man who used to command my life. If anyone has ever had someone hide behind the word family to break you, stay with me. You will want to hear how this ends. Kara was 28 years old and a Navy intelligence officer who had learned to build a life out of silence and calculation. But the roots of that life stretched back to a small stucco house in Escondido, where her father Mark, a former Marine gunnery sergeant, ruled every corner as if it were still his barracks. Mark carried the war home, but never admitted it. He filled the garage with old sea bags, rusted ammo cans, and fading photos of himself in uniform. And he hung his promotions on the hallway wall, as if the house itself needed to salute him every time he walked through. From the outside, their street looked like any quiet Southern California suburb, with trimmed yards and kids riding bikes past. But inside, the Dalton home discipline was the religion, and Mark was the preacher. Kara learned that before she even understood the word discipline. She remembered being no more than 8 years old, standing barefoot in the backyard because she had cried too long after scraping her knee. Mark pointed to the concrete and said, "Real Marines do not fall apart over a little scratch." He made her do push-ups until her arms trembled. When she slowed, he barked, "Faster, or you will be running the block." At 9, she did run the block, circling it breathless while her brother watched from the window. Every time she slowed, he shouted again from the doorway, "Work for your strength, or life will eat you alive." The neighbors pretended they heard nothing. But the note said what it said, and that night Mark stood behind her with a pair of scissors and said, "You are not going to school tomorrow," pretending you have more authority than the people who teach you. Before she understood what was happening, he cut her hair in jagged chunks, letting the strands fall across her lap and onto the kitchen floor. She stared at the pile of hair, stunned. Mark said, "No daughter of mine is walking into my house looking weak." He meant it. Weak was anything he could not control. As Kara grew older, the punishments changed, but the logic behind them never did. At 12, she rolled her eyes during dinner because he mocked her for reading too much. He made her run the block in the cold night air until her lungs burned. At 13, she asked to join a school club, and he told her that extracurriculars were for kids who did not understand real responsibility. When she pushed back, that was the first time he shaved her head almost clean, insisting it would teach her humility. "You are too soft," he said. "No Dalton of mine is weak." Kara learned early to mask every emotion. She learned to quiet her breath, tighten her throat, and say nothing, because silence was safer. But inside, she memorized everything, every rule, every contradiction, every weakness. It was not rebellion yet. It was survival. She repeated to herself, "Survive now, leave later." The repetition hardened into a habit, and the habit shaped everything she became. People thought intelligence officers were born out of elite schools or perfect families. Kara knew many were born out of necessity. Every time she absorbed another humiliation, she learned to watch without reacting. Every time Mark raised his voice, she learned to listen between the words. Every time he punished her, she learned to read intention, not volume. That ability to read patterns, to understand motive, and to hold herself steady was the foundation of a skill set she would one day weaponize. By 16, Kara had begun to understand she possessed something Mark could not control. She had a mind that organized chaos. She remembered the day her debate team coach pulled her aside after she won a regional competition. She had answered a surprise question about national security strategy calmly, precisely, and without flinching. The coach had looked at her with a quiet awe and said, "You have an analytical brain most adults never develop. You know that, right?" She shrugged, but inside, she felt something shift. A small, private proof that she was not what Mark had spent years trying to hammer her into. She never bragged about it. She never told Mark. But that comment lived in a locked drawer, somewhere deep inside her. It was the early spark of a future she could not yet name. And still, life at home escalated, as it always had. Whenever Kara showed a hint of independence, he tightened control. If she stayed late at study group, he accused her of disrespecting him. If she brought home an A in a subject he did not value, he told her it meant nothing. If she cried even once, he made her run the block again until she stopped. The rhythm was constant humiliation, packaged as discipline. The worst moment of those early years was still the first time he took clippers to her hair when she was 13. She remembered the buzzing sound, the cold vibration against her scalp, the way the air in the kitchen felt too still. Mark said, "No daughter of mine is walking into my house looking weak." She remembered watching her hair fall piece by piece across the floor, thinking that this was not discipline, it was ownership. And as the last strand hit the tile, Kara made a promise, silently, somewhere beneath the sting of humiliation. "One day, I will not be the one sitting in this chair. One day, I will be the one giving orders." She did not yet know that she would grow into an officer trusted by cells, or that she would stand in rooms where men like her father would snap to attention. But the vow settled inside her like steel, and it stayed there, waiting for the day it would take shape. When I chose the Navy, he treated it like I had joined the enemy. It did not matter that I was still serving the country. In Mark's mind, there was only one branch worth bleeding for, and anything outside the Marine Corps was betrayal dressed in a different uniform. I was 19 when I packed everything I owned into a single duffel bag and stepped out of the Dalton house for the last time. I did not slam the door. I did not shout. I just walked. But to him, that walk was treason. He wanted me to enlist as a Marine and repeat his path step by step, as if my future existed only as an extension of his past. The week I signed Navy papers, he did not speak to me at all. The silence lasted until the day the recruiter's car pulled up in our driveway. Mark watched from the porch with his arms crossed and his jaw locked tight. Not one word of luck, not one nod of approval, not 1 ounce of pride. Only the look of a man who believed his daughter had walked into the rival's tent. That belief grew into anger. Months later, during my first leave, we had the fight, "Do not come back here for Thanksgiving. I do not break bread with traitors." He meant it. That year, I spent Thanksgiving in a chow hall with people who barely knew my name, and yet I still felt safer than I would have felt at home. The cum duan became part of our relationship. Anytime I accomplished something he did not approve of, he erased it by withholding access. No holidays, no family calls, no normal rituals. My life stayed divided into 2 categories: the Navy, where I grew, and the Dalton house, where I did not exist. But even as he pushed me out, my world widened faster than I expected. In my second year, someone up the chain saw something in my reports and pulled me into a room with no windows. They asked questions about pattern recognition, analytic reasoning, and operational foresight. They wanted to know how I processed pressure. They wanted to know how I broke down large, moving problems. They wanted to know how I remained calm. After that, my career path shifted. I started working in rooms where phones were not allowed and no one used first names. It was not glamorous, and no one saluted me for it. But it meant responsibility. It meant trust. It meant value of a kind my father had never acknowledged. I kept that part of my life quiet. Secrets became muscles. The less I said, the stronger they felt. I wrote nothing in emails. I said even less on the phone. During one brief period of leave, I went home to retrieve a few childhood things and found a large envelope from the Navy sitting on the kitchen table. It was my commissioning letter. My path from enlisted to officer had become official. I picked it up slowly, almost reverently. Mark looked at me, glanced at the envelope, and tossed it back onto the table with a flat, disgusted motion. A piece of paper does not make you a warrior. Blood does. He said it like a truth, but it felt like an insult. I could have argued that modern warfare required intelligence and strategy, and minds capable of outthinking threats before they reached the field. But arguing with him was like arguing with a locked door. Instead, I folded the commissioning letter carefully and placed it into a folder I kept tucked inside my duffel bag. It became a habit to store things like that in private folders, commendations, notes, accolades, anything that could remind me later who I was becoming when the world tried to flatten me back into nothing. Over time, each file became proof that I belonged in spaces he never imagined. But none of that stopped the escalation between us. Every step I took in the Navy seemed to push him further into resentment. He heard rumors through neighbors that I worked near special operations, but he assumed it was clerical work. He had no idea that my role had started to intersect with naval special warfare, or that my briefings reached people he had once saluted. He never asked, and I never offered. Some truths earned more power in silence. I learned to live with the distance until the day I received orders sending me to Coronado for a new assignment. It was not ceremonial, and no one shook my hand in a way a movie would show it, but the shift mattered. It meant responsibility expanded again. It meant I was stepping into a world where decisions affected people who executed missions in the dark. It meant my brain for operations had become a tool for people who depended on precision. I moved into a BOQ room that smelled faintly of old carpeting and fresh paint. I set down my single bag and stared at the empty space, wondering if this was what freedom was supposed to feel like. On the desk was a framed photo from OCS graduation. I was standing in uniform, smiling slightly, with the California sun behind me. There was an empty space beside me in that picture. Mark never came to the ceremony. He had not even called. I used to think I would get used to him not showing up, but the BOQ room made me realize I already had. For years he had stayed absent from every milestone, but I had never expected what came next. I thought distance meant safety. I thought silence meant peace. I had not imagined he would find a way to shatter both on a future Christmas morning, clippers in hand. Christmas at my father's house felt heavier than a holiday should. Walking back through the door that year was like stepping into an old pattern I knew too well. The living room was dressed in lights and tinsel, the TV humming a football game, the smell of turkey drifting in from the kitchen, while Linda moved between stove and table, determined to keep everything smooth. Mark sat at the head of the table with a beer in his hand when I walked in, wearing my navy blouse and slacks under a plain coat. His eyes went from my short hair to my uniform cut, and he smirked. "So you decided to dress like a man for Christmas this year," he said. "Or is that your navy costume?" The words landed like they were meant to bruise. Before I could answer, Linda spoke quickly. "She works hard, Mark. You should be proud." He snorted. "For the wrong flag." The 4 words were tossed out lightly, but I felt them sink. Marine versus Navy was not a joke with him. In his world, my career would always be on the wrong side. We took our seats. For a few minutes, there was only the scrape of silverware, the TV, the hollow small talk. Dylan asked surface questions about base life, about the weather, about how long I would stay. No one asked how it felt to brief missions that could cost lives. No one asked if I was tired. Mark wiped gravy from his beard with the side of his hand and fixed his eyes on me again. "So, you still pushing papers?" I set my fork down. "We lost no one on the last op I helped plan," I said. It came out steady. "It is not just paper." His laugh was sharp. "Oh, so you saved the world from your computer. Good for you, Lieutenant." The way he said my rank turned it into something small and childish. In my head, another room blinked to life. A cramped op cell washed in dim light, the smell of coffee and dust. Screens showing routes and terrain. My finger tracing lines on a map while a team of operators listened and memorized every turn. I could hear one of their voices later, tired and relieved, telling us they were all coming home. That memory had weight where it mattered. At this table, it was worth nothing. I took a breath and chose not to argue. He had never believed that information could be a shield. To him, if you were not holding a rifle, you were decoration. Dessert came and went, the tension thickening instead of fading. Linda collected plates with quick movements, like speed could keep the evening from tipping. Dylan scrolled through his phone and laughed at something he did not share. I pushed my chair back to help, but Mark lifted a hand. "Sit," he said. "Got you a present. Tradition time." His tone turned bright, the way it always did when he wanted everyone to pretend what came next was harmless. He crossed to the hall closet, reached inside, and came back with a set of clippers, the same ones he used on himself in the garage, metal and cord and buzzing promise. He held them up like a prop. "Dylan, turn the music up. Let's make this fun." Dylan obeyed, bumping the volume on a country Christmas song until it filled the room. I stayed standing. "Dad, I am an officer," I said. "I have regulations." He plugged the clippers into the outlet by the tree. The buzz snapped on, filling the space between us. "Regulations end at my front door," he said, voice low and sure. "Sit." Linda stood in the doorway with a dish towel in her hands, eyes fixed on the floor. She did not say a word. My body wanted to walk out. Every part of me wanted to grab my keys and leave him talking to an empty chair. But I knew how he would turn that into a new story about his ungrateful daughter who thought she was better than the man who made her. So I sat. The kitchen chair in the middle of the living room felt like a spotlight. The Christmas lights reflected in the blank TV screen ahead of me. Mark stepped behind me and set a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Maybe if I take your hair, you will remember who made you tough in the first place," he said. The humiliation rose before the clippers touched my skin. I stared at my own faint outline in the TV, seeing not the officer who had briefed an op a month before, but the 13-year-old who had watched her hair fall in jagged chunks on a different floor. The buzz grew louder as he brought the blades close to my scalp. He did not ask if I was ready. He never had. Dylan shifted on the couch. Linda turned back toward the kitchen. No one stepped between us. No one said that is enough. The first pass shaved a strip down the center of my head. Warm air hit the new bare skin, and loose hair slid down my shoulders onto the Christmas rug, dark strands against cartoon snowmen. Shame flared, then flattened into something colder. I focused on my breathing, the way I did before walking into a high-pressure briefing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count and observe. I cataloged every word, every gesture, the way his fingers tightened on the clippers, the way Dylan kept his eyes on his phone until it was over. When he clicked the clippers off, the sudden silence felt louder than the buzzing had been. He gave my head a small slap with his palm, checking his work. "There you go," he said. "Now you remember where you came from." He stepped around in front of me with his phone already up. leaned in, and snapped a picture. My scalp prickled under the light. I kept my face neutral. He grinned at the screen. "Made her a real Marine again," he said, like he was reading a caption only he could see. He tucked the phone into his pocket, satisfied. I saw the flash of the image in that moment. A man pleased with his own power. A woman with a shaved head sitting very still. He has no idea, I thought, that somewhere deep in a safe there is a file with my name and operations he will never be cleared to hear about. He did not see the rank, the briefings, the nights in rooms without windows. He saw only the child he believed he owned. I sat there, feeling the cool air on my bare scalp, and understood that something fundamental had shifted. This was not discipline. It was a final attempt to prove that inside his house, I would always sit where he told me to sit. What he could not see was that in every other place that mattered, I had already learned how to stand. The morning after Christmas, I went back to Coronado, with my scalp still raw under a knit cap that smelled like detergent and turkey smoke. The sky over the bay was a hard, clear blue that made everything look sharper than I felt. I parked where I always parked, walked through the gate, showed my ID, and let the familiar rhythm of base life press in around me. Uniforms, boots, clipped conversations in the distance, the low hum of generators. It was a different world from my father's living room, but the echo of the clippers was still in my bones. I kept my cap on as I climbed the stairs to the small briefing room. Inside, it was the usual setup: a narrow table, a wall screen, a few chairs, and the same neutral paint that tried to make every space look identical. Chief Mason Cole sat near the front, with two other SEALs, a pair of quiet shapes in tan shirts and worn boots. They nodded when I came in. No salutes in this room. Just the acknowledgement of people who understood why the door closed behind us. We did not waste time on small talk. The air was all business and habit. I plugged my laptop into the projector, and the map filled the screen in muted earth tones. Brown ridges, pale roads, a thin river line cutting through. It was not the op we were about to run that morning, but a debrief on the one we had finished weeks before. The kind of lessons learned session that kept people alive on the next round. I pointed to a narrow stretch near the edge of the map and traced the route we had picked for evac. "You remember this turn?" I asked, glancing at Mason. "This was the choke point." He nodded once, eyes following every line. "Chief Cole was not supposed to come home from that one," I said quietly. The other two SEALs looked at him, then back at the map. My map made sure he did. I did not say more. I did not need to explain the radio calls, or the weather shift, or the last-minute change I fought for when intel suggested the main road was dirty. They knew what it meant for a path on the screen to become the difference between a folded flag and a man sitting in a chair listening to a briefing. I walked them through the rest of it the way we had staggered timing the alternate LZ, the backup plan we never had to use. The tone stayed flat and professional. We talked about distances and minutes, not fear and almosts. That was our language. When the debrief ended, the other guys pushed back their chairs with the scrape of metal on tile. One of them clapped Mason on the shoulder as they filed out. "See you at the cage later, Chief." The door closed behind them and the room fell quiet. I exhaled a breath I had not noticed I was holding and reached up to adjust my uniform collar. The knit cap suddenly felt too tight. I pulled it off, meaning only to cool my head and smooth the edge of my blouse before the next meeting. The fluorescent light hit my bare scalp, and for a moment I just stared at my reflection in the dark screen. The buzz cut made me look younger and harsher all at once. Then I saw Mason in the glass behind me. He had turned back from the doorway to grab his tablet, but now he was standing, still eyes fixed on my head. I had seen that expression on his face once before, on a deployment slide, when a grainy image revealed something no one wanted to find, an IED tucked under gravel. His face did the same kind of shutdown now, Slow, controlled focus. He set the tablet down on the table without looking away. "Who did that?" he asked. There was no curiosity in it, only a hard, flat line. My first instinct was to make some joke about Christmas haircuts and marine traditions, to throw a tarp over what had happened. The words did not come. My throat closed instead. "My father," I said. "He called it a gift." Mason stepped closer, just enough that I could see the shift in his jaw. "First time?" he asked. The question was gentle and sharp at the same time. "No," I said before I could stop myself, then added, "Not exactly." It came out thin and vague, but the truth sat under it like a heavy object. His eyes did a fast, quiet scan of my face, my shoulders, the way I held myself in the chair. He was not just looking at my hair. He was reading posture pattern, the way he would on a target who claimed everything was fine. "This is about control," he said more to himself than to me. It was not a question. "You could call it that," I answered. In my head, old scenes flickered. The backyard runs, the scissors in the kitchen. The first time for talking back, the second time for choosing Navy. The clippers for Christmas, because the sight of my rank on my shoulders scratched at his pride. Mason took a breath and let it out through his nose. He reached for the tablet, then stopped and laid his palm on the table instead, fingers spread as if bracing. "Ma'am, we have taken down people with less power than what he has over you," he said. "Let us help." I turned to look at him fully. The words tilted something in the room. He was not talking about a mission profile in a foreign country. He was talking about my father in Escondido, like he belonged in the same category as the men they were trained to neutralize. "Since when do SEALs get involved in family drama?" I asked. My voice held more edge than I meant, but I did not take it back. He did not flinch. "Since your family drama started messing with my commanding officer," he replied. The title sat between us, heavier than rank on a collar. He was not flattering me. He was stating a fact. In this room, in this chain of events, I was the one who gave orders that helped bring his team home. That mattered to him, more than whatever story my father told about making me tough. Mason picked up the tablet finally and closed the cover with care. He looked at my shaved head one more time, and his eyes had the same look they had on the day we rerouted that evac path. Calculation, commitment. A quiet decision already made. "Ma'am, I have a plan," he said. This time it did not sound like an offhand promise. It sounded like the start of an operation. That night, my apartment near the water was quiet, except for the distant sound of waves and the low hum of the refrigerator. The lights in Coronado outside my window looked soft and far away, like someone else's life. I sat at my small desk with a lamp casting a circle of warm light over my laptop and a worn notebook. For years, I had told myself that what happened in Escondido stayed in Escondido, that I could keep my father in one compartment and the rest of my life in another. After Christmas, that lie felt thin. I opened my laptop, created a new document, and stared at the empty title field for a long moment. Then I typed, Personal AO, Dalton House. In every mission brief, AO meant Area of Operations, terrain, people, threat vectors. This time, it meant the place I grew up. The house I kept pretending was just a house. I drew a simple grid on the page. Date, event, category, impact. Evidence. The same columns I used when building a threat picture overseas. My notebook lay open next to me, pen ready. I started with what I could not forget even if I wanted to. First time being hit. I wrote it down. 8 years old, backyard, crying over a scraped knee until Mark's patience snapped and his hand snapped with it across my cheek. Category: physical control. Impact: fear. Compliance. Evidence: my own memory, the way my skin had burned, the way my brother had gone silent at the window. Then the first haircut. 13 years old in the kitchen. He had read a note from a teacher who said I talked back. He used scissors that time, not clippers, hacking my hair until it fell in uneven piles. Category: physical and emotional control. Impact: humiliation. Isolation. Evidence: school photo from that year, the way the girl in the picture did not smile. I logged the first time he banned me from home. 19, fresh in uniform, sitting at his table when he called me traitor for choosing Navy over Marines. I wrote his word down in the event line. Traitor. Category: emotional control, social isolation. Impact: no Thanksgiving, no family support during early service. Evidence: absence of any calls or visits that year. Text from my mother saying it was better if I stayed on base. Each entry went in like a small spike. I filled in the moments that had seemed disconnected before. The way he had laughed at my commissioning letter and thrown it on the table. The words, "Piece of paper does not make you a warrior. Blood does." Category: emotional control. Impact: undercutting achievements, shaping self-doubt. Evidence: the letter itself, folded in a folder in my closet, untouched by him except for that one contemptuous toss. I kept writing. I added, "this Christmas," the clippers, the rug, the family picture he took afterward with a grin. Category: physical and emotional control. Impact: humiliation, reactivation of old trauma, attempt to reassert dominance despite my rank. Evidence: the photo on his phone, my own bare scalp in the mirror, the fact that he had framed it as a gift. The more lines I filled, the more the page began to look like what it truly was: a pattern. Not random bad nights or a temper he would one day get under control, but a deliberate series of actions designed to keep me small. I added another column in my notebook. Triggers. As I read down the list, I realized something I had never put into words. Almost every major punishment lined up with the moment where I had stepped away from him. The first haircut after I corrected an adult. The backyard runs after I showed fear he did not approve of. The ban from Thanksgiving when I chose Navy. The contempt for the commissioning letter. The Christmas shaving after years of promotions and quiet success. My father did not just punish disobedience. He punished separation. He could not stand that I had power anywhere he did not control. The realization settled in my chest like a stone, and like a key at the same time. I was not crazy. I was not overreacting. I was staring straight at a matrix of control that I would have flagged immediately if it had belonged to anyone else. My phone buzzed on the table, screen glowing with a new message. It was from Mason. "You free tomorrow?" he had written earlier. "I know someone you should talk to." Attached was a name and an office number. Inside legal. JAG. The Judge Advocate General's office was where uniform and law met, the place where the military brought its rules to bear. I had spent years funneling information to the operators and commanders who needed it. I had never thought about using the system for myself. The next afternoon, I sat in a small office with beige walls and a framed American flag behind the desk. A JAG officer in crisp khakis read through the short summary I had typed up and printed from my personal AO file. He did not interrupt. He did not rush. When he finished, he set the papers down and folded his hands. "He does not have to break bones for it to be abuse," he said. His voice was calm but firm. "What you are describing is a pattern of coercive control and physical intimidation." The phrase sounded clinical, but it hit like a diagnosis. Coercive control. Physical intimidation. Words I had used in briefs when talking about hostile actors, not family members. I asked what any of this could possibly mean in practice. He explained options. Not in dramatic language, just in clear steps. I could make an official report. I could document incidents. I could request that any contact that put me in danger be taken seriously. He reminded me that what happened off base still mattered when it affected my ability to serve. "You are an officer," he said. "You are expected to take care of your people and also yourself." Sitting there, I realized that treating my own situation like a mission was not selfish. It was necessary. The escalation was not a surge of anger. It was a decision. I would not wait for the next holiday to see how far my father would go. I told the JAG officer I wanted to make an official statement. He nodded and began to fill out the forms with the efficiency of someone who had seen too many of these cases already. That night back at my desk, I opened the personal AO file again and added a new section at the bottom. Actions taken. Under it, I wrote the date I met with JAG, the name of the officer, the fact that an official report existed now, with my words on paper. For the first time, the file did not end with something he had done to me. It ended with something I was doing in response. I read back over the timeline slowly. First punishment, first haircut, first ban, traitor, Christmas clippers. Each line sat beside its category, impact and evidence. The pattern was undeniable. My eyes drifted up from the screen to the wall above my desk. On it hung a small cluster of things I had never shown my father. A medal in a simple frame. A challenge coin from a unit that had thanked me for a plan I had written. A letter on thick paper from an admiral whose signature took up half the page, thanking me for my work on an operation that would never appear in any public briefing. For a moment, I let myself really feel the contrast. On one wall, the tangible proof of the life I had built. On the screen, the record of the person who had tried to control it. I closed the file and sat back in my chair. I spent my career building dossiers on threats overseas. It was time to admit my biggest threat lived in Escondido. I told myself that before anything official moved forward, I owed my family at least one honest conversation. Part of me still believed that if they saw what I saw written out as clearly as my dossier, they would stand on my side. Another part already knew better. I met my mother first. We chose a small coffee shop not far from their house, the kind of place with chalkboard menus and fake plants on shelves. I got there early and sat with my back to the wall, habit more than paranoia. When Linda walked in, she scanned the room, spotted me, and hesitated just long enough for me to notice before she pasted on a small smile and came over. Her eyes flicked to the knit cap I was still wearing. As she sat down, she reached for her cup and said, without really looking at me, "It is growing back already." It landed like a rehearsal line, something she had practiced in her head on the drive over. I pulled the cap off anyway. If we were going to do this, we were not doing it around the edges. The air touched my bare scalp, and I watched her reaction. Her gaze jumped away, fixed on the sugar packets. "He held me down, Mom," I said. I made my voice as calm as I could. I did not raise it. I did not dramatize it. I stated the fact the way I would state that a road was blocked or a bridge was gone. She flinched at the word. Her fingers tightened around the cardboard sleeve of her cup. "He is under a lot of stress," she said quickly. "The VA, his back pain, the bills. You know how it is. He has not been sleeping." It was a soft deflection, wrapped in concern that was not for me. I felt something in my chest fold in on itself. "I am not talking about his stress," I said. I am talking about him putting his hands on me and shaving my head in the living room while you watched." Her lips pressed together. "I did not watch," she protested weakly. "I was in the kitchen. I heard the clippers, that is all." As if not looking directly at it meant it did not happen. As if sound carried less responsibility than sight. I leaned in a little. "He told Dylan to turn the music up," I said. "He told me regulations ended at his front door. He called it a gift." "That is not stress, Mom. That is control." She shook her head, the motion small and tight. "He is old school, Kara. That is how he shows love. He pushes. He pushed you to be strong. Look at you. You are successful. It worked." The words stung more than I wanted them to. I pictured my dossier columns, the categories, the impacts. In that grid, his methods were not tough love. They were documented harm. Here at this table, they were being rebranded as parenting. "He could have killed my career with that haircut," I said. "If it had happened closer to deployment, if I had not been able to cover it, if someone saw it as instability. Do you understand that?" She sipped her coffee instead of answering. The silence did it for her. What I heard was not, "I understand," or "I am sorry." What I heard was, "I am not willing to push against him, even for you." She reached for my hand then, as if she felt the distance widening. "He has been through so much," she murmured. "War does that to a man. The pills, the appointments, the paperwork. He is not himself. He did the best he could with what he knew." It was the gentlest gaslighting I had ever experienced. Every sentence asked me to step away from my own memory and into his. Every excuse asked me to set down my anger for the sake of an easier peace. "That is not the best he could do," I said quietly. "It is just the most he could get away with." Her eyes flashed and then dimmed. "Why are you bringing this up now?" she asked. "It is Christmas. We should be grateful we are all still here." I watched her choose the fragile calm of denial over the hard edge of truth, and I understood something I had been resisting for years. My mother loved quiet more than she loved justice. She would rather smooth the surface than admit the water was poisoned. I pulled my hand back. "Because I am not going to pretend anymore," I said. "That is all." The conversation dribbled out after that. We talked about small things for a few minutes. The kind of pointless topics people use when they are done saying anything that matters. When we stood to leave, she hugged me quickly, careful not to touch my bare head. Driving away, I realized that in her version of the story, there would always be an asterisk by my name. Difficult, emotional, overreacting. It was easier than rewriting my father. A few days later, I met Dylan at a sports bar near the freeway. His choice. The game on the screens gave him something to look at when he did not want to look at me. He wore a hoodie and ball cap, fingers tapping the table in jittery rhythms. "So," he said when the waitress had dropped off our drinks and left, "Mom says you are mad at Dad." The understatement almost made me laugh. I took a breath instead. "I am not mad," I said. "I am done pretending what he does is normal." His eyes slid to my head, the short, rough hair that had started to come in. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That was messed up." He did the same to me with PT all the time, though. Well, not the hair stuff, the pushing, the yelling. That is just how he is. Like weather, like gravity. I felt my jaw tighten. "Just how he is does not make it right," I said. "He held me down and shaved my head because I told him no. That is not discipline, that is assault." The word landed between us like a dropped weight. Dylan shifted uncomfortably. I guess," he said. "I do not know. It is not like you did not know what he was like. Why did you come back if you knew he was like that? The question hit harder than any insult. It was not framed as concern. It was framed as blame. If you know the house is on fire, why walk inside? Because it is my house too, I wanted to say. Because I thought maybe this time would be different. Because I wanted a normal Christmas for once. Because people are allowed to hope. What I said was simpler. Because he is my father. Dylan shook his head like it was a weak answer. He took a drink, eyes back on the game. He is old, Kara. You are the strong one. You can take it. The words clicked another piece of the puzzle into place. In my house, strength had never been something you built for yourself. It was something other people used as an excuse to hurt you. In my house, I was always the problem. Too sensitive, too defiant, too proud. In the Navy, I was the solution. The person they called when they needed a clear picture, a better plan, a way out. Those two truths sat side by side in my chest, and suddenly I felt more tired than anything else. You know he held me down, I repeated softly. You know that is not okay. Dylan looked at me then, with something like conflict in his eyes, but it faded fast. I do not want to get in the middle, he said. It is between you and him. That was it. Not a promise to talk to our father, not an offer to back me up. Just a step away from responsibility. Leaving the bar, I understood that my family was not a safety net. It was an audience that preferred the old script. Outside in the parking lot, the air was cool and smelled faintly of gasoline. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I walked to my car. A new email notification slid across the screen. The subject line from the JAG office, clear and precise. Formal hearing and protective order options. My thumb hovered over it for a moment as the reflections of brake lights washed over the asphalt. No one from that house was going to stand between him and his consequences, I thought. But I know men who will. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall in Escondido was not large, but to my father, it might as well have been a cathedral. The walls were lined with framed photos of young men in old uniforms, some fading, some recent. Flags stood in each corner, their colors muted by time and fluorescent light. Plaques and shadow boxes hung in neat rows, each one a story of service boiled down to metal and wood. The air smelled like coffee that had been on the burner too long, and old floor polish. I stood near the back, close enough to hear everything, far enough that my father did not see me when he stepped up to the podium. I had not planned to come at first. The only reason I knew about the event was a flyer my mother had texted me a picture of. Guest speaker tonight, Gunnery Sergeant Mark Dalton, sharing about raising the next generation. The phrase stuck under my skin. At some point between the Clippers and now, he had turned what he did to me into a story he thought was worth telling. The folding chairs creaked as men shifted their weight, settling in. Some wives and a few adult children sat scattered among them. On the wall behind the podium, an American flag hung so large it almost dwarfed the man standing in front of it. Almost. Mark adjusted the microphone with the confidence of someone who had spoken here many times. He wore a VFW vest over a collared shirt, medals pinned across his chest as if he had restitched his identity into the fabric. The room quieted when he cleared his throat. You know, he began, the problem with kids today is they are soft. A ripple of knowing chuckles went through the hall. They spend more time on screens than in the dirt. They want the uniform, the respect, the benefits, but they do not want the discipline. I felt my shoulders tense the way they did when a training range went live. My hands curled slightly at my sides, every muscle remembering the feel of his grip on my arms. He had an audience now, and he was feeding off it. When I was raising my boy and my girl, he went on, gesturing with one hand, I did not let them get away with that. No, sir. In my house, you acted like you wanted to wear the uniform, you lived by it. A man in the front row nodded, arms folded. Another chuckled and muttered something approving under his breath. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Mark smiled, the easy, infectious grin he used at cookouts and parades. Take my daughter, he said. She is Navy now. She wears that officer uniform, thinks she runs the world. A few people laughed. He paused, savoring it. But she did not get there by me coddling her. She got there because I made sure she was tough. Old school. Sometimes they call it harsh now. I call it love that does not bend. The phrase landed heavy. Love that does not bend. I watched his hands on the podium, knuckles white. And for a second I saw the same hands forcing my head forward as the clippers buzzed. He leaned in as if confiding in them. She came home this last Christmas acting like she was too important for our traditions. Hair done her way, attitude. So I reminded her where she came from. I sat her down in the living room, and I shaved her head. Said it was time she remembered what real discipline feels like. The room reacted the exact way he wanted it to. Laughter, whistles, a couple of low exclamations. A man near the middle slapped his knee. Tough love, he called out. That is how you do it. My stomach turned. Mark laughed along with them. That is right, he said. Tough love. She hated it now, sure. But that is why she wears that uniform. Because I did not let her be weak. I felt the words hit something deep inside me that had been holding tight since the night at my kitchen table when I wrote Personal A.O., Dalton House, at the top of a file. Hearing him turn my humiliation into a joke, into a badge of honor, in front of men who had never seen the look on my face in that living room, snapped something that had been stretching for years. My body reacted before I had time to talk myself out of it. My hand unclenched. My feet moved. I stepped out of the shadows in the back and walked down the aisle toward the front. I was distantly aware of Mason standing along the side wall near the exit, arms crossed, having slipped in quietly earlier. I had not asked him to come. He had not asked permission. When I moved, he straightened, watching. At the front, my father was still talking. Kids today think saying no is some kind of right, he was saying. In my house, no is where the lesson starts. The microphone crackled as my voice cut in for the first time that night. May I say something? The room turned as one. Chairs creaked, conversations dropped off. Mark blinked like he was seeing a ghost. Kara, he said, surprise flattening his voice. What are you doing here? I did not answer him. I looked at the man sitting off to the side who seemed to be running the event, the VFW president I had seen at a Memorial Day ceremony once. Could I borrow the mic for a moment? I asked. My tone was the same one I used in a briefing. Clear, no nonsense, expecting cooperation. There was a beat of hesitation. Then he nodded slowly and gestured. Sure, Lieutenant. Come on up. The title hung in the air. My father stiffened. I walked to the podium, stood where he had been standing moments before. For a second, I felt the weight of the flag behind me and the weight of every eye in the hall. My heart was pounding, but my voice, when it came out, was steady. Gunnery Sergeant Mark Dalton is my father, I said. And what you just heard was not tough love. It was assault. The word fell like a gavel. The reaction was instant and mixed. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. A couple of men frowned. A woman near the aisle sucked in a breath. One man barked out, "Come on now." Another murmured, "Let her speak." I kept my hands loose on the edge of the podium, like I did when presenting an op order. I did not shout. I did not cry. I laid out the facts. This Christmas, he held me down in his living room and shaved my head because I told him no. He did it while the television was on and the tree was lit and my family watched. He called it a gift, and he is calling it love. It is neither. It is control. My father tried to step back toward the microphone, but the VFW president raised a hand slightly, a quiet signal to wait. Mark shot him a look, but stopped. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice rang out. "And who are you to judge a gunnery sergeant's methods?" The question came from an older man with a face like baked leather, veteran's cap pulled low. The kind of man who had spent his life measuring respect in volume and obedience. I turned my head toward him. "Lieutenant Kara Dalton, United States Navy Intelligence," I said, each word measured. "I just came off a tour riding operations your sons and grandsons executed. Discipline is not abuse." I did not say it with swagger. I said it the way I would state a weather condition or a time hack. The title was not a brag. It was context. The statement held a different kind of authority than my father's stories, because it did not depend on making someone smaller. The hall went quieter. Even the ones who did not like what I was saying could not easily dismiss it. I continued. Discipline is training someone to handle hardship, to stand up under pressure, to take responsibility for their actions. It is not putting your hands on them when they do not consent and calling the bruises character. It is not using fear as glue to keep your family in line. I let my gaze sweep the room, catching a few pairs of eyes that quickly slid away. "You all served," I said. "You know that integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. I am telling you what happened when no one but my family was watching. Calling it tough love does not change what it was." Behind me, I could almost feel my father vibrating with anger. He started forward again. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "She has always been dramatic. She is turning a lesson into a crime." A few men looked back and forth between us, like they were watching a tennis match they had not meant to attend. The VFW president stood up then, smoothing his vest. He stepped closer to the podium, addressing the room instead of just us. "We appreciate your service, Gunny," he said carefully. "But we also take care of our own. If one of our daughters says something is wrong, we listen. We will be opening an internal review, Gunny. In the meantime, I think you should sit down." The words hung there. For a second, no one moved. Then my father's face flushed a deep red, the same color it had turned when a young Marine once corrected him on a range rule. He looked at the president, at me, at the room that was no longer giving him the easy laughter he expected. The power in the hall shifted, almost imperceptibly, away from him. Slowly, stiffly, he lowered himself into a chair near the front. The sight hit me harder than any victory could have. For the first time, someone other than me told him to sit down. I stepped away from the podium and walked toward the exit. As I passed along the side wall, I felt, rather than saw, Mason fall into step a few paces behind me, a solid presence like a silent rear guard. We did not speak as we pushed open the door. The late afternoon air outside felt cooler, cleaner, like stepping out of a stuffy tent. Inside that hall, the story of Gunnery Sergeant Mark Dalton had shifted. It was no longer just about the hero at the front of the room. Now, it also included the daughter who finally stood up. I had spent years speaking in rooms where the stakes were measured in lives, but walking into the small county courthouse for the first hearing about my own father made my mouth go dry in a way a classified briefing never had. The building itself was unremarkable: beige walls and scuffed tile floors, a metal detector at the entrance manned by a bored deputy who glanced at my military ID and waved me through. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. More like an oversized classroom with pews, a raised bench, and a state flag drooping in one corner. A few strangers sat scattered on the benches, waiting for their own hearings about things that had nothing to do with me: traffic tickets and restraining orders and divorces. To them, my story would just be another case on a crowded docket. To me, it was the day I stopped letting my father's version of events be the only one anyone ever heard. I sat at the petitioner table with my attorney, a civilian woman Jag had recommended who had the same calm, contained energy I had seen in good commanding officers. In front of her were neatly organized folders, each tabbed and labeled. Copies of the documentation I had built in my apartment by the ocean turned into exhibits with numbers and sticky notes. Across the aisle, my father sat with his own lawyer, a man in a shiny suit who kept leaning in to whisper to him. Mark stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands folded on the table as if this were another formation he could get through by sheer force of will. When the judge entered, everyone rose. We sat when told. The clerk read the case caption, and for a moment, hearing my name and his said together like that made my stomach twist. The judge was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a voice that carried easily. She looked down at the paperwork, then up at me. "Lieutenant Dalton," she said, "you are seeking a restraining order against your father, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She nodded toward my attorney. "Counsel, you may proceed." My lawyer stood and began walking the court through the timeline, her questions guiding me. Unlike at the VFW hall, I was not free to tell the story any way I liked. Here, there was procedure, rules about what could be asked and how it had to be answered. I found a strange comfort in that. I stated my name for the record, my relationship to Mark, the date of the Christmas incident. I described the living room, the clippers, the way he held my shoulders down when I tried to stand. I talked about the previous patterns, the smaller humiliations that had led here. I kept my voice level, sticking to concrete details the way I had learned to in after-action reports. Every so often I saw the judge jot a note. When my lawyer introduced the exhibits, I watched her move with the same precision I used when laying out a mission board. "Exhibit 1, she said, is a series of photographs taken within 24 hours of the incident, showing the condition of my client's scalp and shoulders. Exhibit 2 is a written statement from a witness describing Mr. Dalton's own account of the event at a Veterans of Foreign Wars meeting, in which he characterizes it as something he did to teach her a lesson. Exhibit 3 is a log of prior incidents my client recorded contemporaneously, showing a pattern of physical and emotional control. The paper that had started as Personal A.O. Dalton House was now part of a court record. When it was my father's turn, his lawyer rose and shifted the narrative as smoothly as a man changing slides on a projector. "Your Honor," he began, "this has been blown out of proportion. My client is a decorated veteran who has struggled with health issues and yet has always done his best for his children. The incident in question was a family disagreement, not a crime." Mark leaned forward, seizing the opening. "She is dramatizing it," he broke in before his lawyer could stop him, his voice rough with frustration. "She has always been emotional, always made mountains out of molehills. That is just how she is." The words landed differently here than they had at our kitchen table. In this room, he was not just a father complaining about a difficult daughter. He was a respondent in a case trying to undermine the credibility of the person asking for protection. The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Dalton," she said evenly, "you will speak through your counsel and you will let her finish. Do you understand?" He swallowed, visibly irritated, and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." His lawyer tried to smooth over the outburst, talking about cultural differences between generations, about how some families use stricter methods of parenting, about how my father's service and his pain medications and his stress had to be taken into account. He called what happened a misguided attempt at humor, a tradition, an overreaction meeting an old-school mentality. Listening to him, I felt that old, familiar pressure in my chest, the one I had felt as a child when adults in the room agreed with each other that my experiences were not what I knew they were. This time, though, there was another voice that mattered more: the judges. When both attorneys had finished their initial arguments, the judge leaned back in her chair and looked at me. "Lieutenant Dalton," she said, "I have read your written statement and heard your testimony. Before I issue any order, I would like to understand a bit more about you. What is your occupation?" My attorney gave me a small nod. I straightened slightly. "I manage information that can send people into harm's way or bring them home," I said. "I know what pressure looks like. This is not that." The room went quiet in a different way. I watched the judge's face as she absorbed that. Something in her expression softened, not into sympathy exactly, but into recognition, the way someone might look at a colleague who knows what it means to carry heavy responsibility. She glanced down at the photographs again, then at the log of incidents, at the transcript of what my father had proudly said at the VFW meeting. She looked over at him, where he sat stiff and angry, and then back at me. She cleared her throat. "The law does not prohibit parents from disciplining their children," she said. "It does, however, prohibit physical acts done without consent that cause harm or are intended to intimidate and control. Based on the evidence before me, I find that the petitioner has met her burden." She picked up a pen. "I am granting the requested restraining order. Mr. Dalton, you are barred from coming within 100 yards of your daughter's residence and workplace, from contacting her by phone, email, or through third parties, except through counsel. Any violation of this order will subject you to immediate consequences, including arrest. Do you understand?" My father stared at her as if she had spoken a language he did not expect to hear directed at him. For his entire life, consequence had been something he passed out, not something that landed on his own file. Finally, he forced out, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge signed the papers. The sound of the pen on the legal pad was almost inaudible, but to me, it was as loud as a gavel. When the hearing adjourned, we all stood. Mark did not look at me as we passed in the narrow aisle. Outside the courtroom, the hallway hummed with the low murmur of other people dealing with their own battles. My lawyer handed me a copy of the order, the stapled pages firm in my hand. "This is enforceable today," she said. "Keep a copy with you. If he shows up, you call. The system does not move fast on everything, but on this, it can." "Thank you," I said. I meant not just for the paper, but for translating my private war into something the law could recognize. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread into the parts of my father's life he had always considered untouchable. The VFW president opened that internal review he had promised. Stories that had once been told as funny anecdotes started to sound different when people looked at them through the lens of what they had heard from me. Mark was quietly informed that he would be stepping back from his leadership role while they sorted through the complaints. There was no public announcement, no dramatic expulsion, just a shift in invitations that did not include him and meetings he was no longer asked to chair. Men who had always sought him out at the bar after events started choosing different stools, different conversations. At the grocery store, a neighbor who had been at that hall looked away when he walked down the aisle. Social shame is a slow burn, but it is still heat. For a man who had built his second life around being the hero at the front of the room, that subtle distancing cut deeper than he would ever admit. For me, the strangest part was how normal my days looked from the outside while all of this was happening. I still drove to base. I still logged into secure systems, still read satellite imagery and human reports, still sat in conference rooms with no windows and briefed people on routes and contingencies. One afternoon, not long after the hearing, I walked out of a meeting and checked my phone, a reflex that had nothing to do with my father. A new email from my commanding officer sat at the top of my inbox. Subject line, "Follow up on last quarter." Inside, past a short note of thanks for my work on a recent operation, was an offer. They were recommending me for a move into a joint operations planning cell, a role that would put me in the room earlier and more often when high-level decisions were made. I stood there in the fluorescent hallway, staring at the screen, the buzz of printers and distant voices fading for a moment. The same week my father lost access to my driveway, I thought, I got access to a room I had spent my career trying to earn. In the weeks after the hearing, my life settled into a rhythm that felt almost foreign in its steadiness. The chaos that had once lived in the back of my mind like a low, burning engine had quieted, leaving space I did not know what to do with. Most mornings, I woke before sunrise, laced my running shoes, and jogged along the bay where the air smelled like salt and diesel from the early fishing boats. The water was always changing, sometimes glassy, sometimes churning, but running beside it felt like moving past something heavy. I would return to base, badge through the layers of security, and step into the world where the stakes made sense to me. By mid-morning, I was usually in a secure room with a handful of officers and analysts, screens glowing with maps and feeds, documents that would never see the outside of classified channels. My job had evolved quietly but significantly after the email that came the day of the restraining order. Now I was not just refining plans others had drafted. I was writing the concept for operations that would shape entire missions. It was the kind of work that lived in the shadows of national news. If it went wrong, the headline would be on every network. If it went right, no one would know my name. I was used to that. I liked the clarity of it. At lunchtime, I sometimes walked the perimeter trail behind the command building, letting the sound of aircraft taking off and landing wash over me. Navy and Marine jets, helicopters, transports, each with its own thrum. In the distance, Coronado shimmered like it belonged to another universe entirely. In some ways, it did. In the evenings, I kept moving because stillness felt too sharp. I ran the bayside paths, lit by street lamps that cast long reflections on the water. There was a small support group that met twice a week in a borrowed classroom near the Family Readiness Center, mostly spouses and adult children of veterans who had dealt with anger or control issues in their households. I went quietly and sat in the back at first, listening as others spoke about things that had once felt too specific to my own house. A Marine wife talking about how her husband slammed doors instead of hitting walls. A son trying to reconcile the father who deployed 3 times with the man who sulked and shouted at home. No one there knew my rank or my clearances. They just saw another person trying to unlearn the way fear can shape your reactions. The contrast between my two worlds grew sharper by the day. In uniform, I was decisive, respected, someone whose assessments could move resources across oceans. Out of uniform, I was someone trying to figure out what it meant to protect myself, not just everyone else. The irony was not lost on me. Intel officers are trained to see patterns, to anticipate threats, to map behavior. I had spent years doing that for foreign actors, but had never turned those tools inward until Mason looked at me in that briefing room and asked, "Who did that?" I still heard that question sometimes in the quiet. My apartment near the ocean became a place where I practiced normal. I cooked simple meals, mostly because the act of chopping vegetables and stirring pans had a rhythm I could control. I let music play without worrying whether it masked footsteps, the way I had as a teenager when my father stomped through the hallways, looking for someone to correct. I opened windows to let the sea air in, and moved the furniture slightly each week, trying to find a configuration that felt entirely mine. Some nights, the loneliness pressed in like fog. Not suffocating, but persistent. I had cut my father out of my life in a way that could not be undone. And even though it was the right move, there was a hollowness to it. He had filled the landscape of my childhood with such force that removing him left a blank space I had to learn to stop staring at. I did not miss him. I missed the version of him I had spent half my life trying to earn, the one I thought might appear if I did everything right. The truth that no version like that had ever existed came in waves. One evening, while grading Intel summaries, my phone buzzed with a group chat message from one of the support group women reminding everyone about the next meeting. Her message was simple and warm, and left me oddly grateful for the small community forming at the edges of my structured world. Another night, I found myself standing on my balcony, watching lights twinkle across the bay, and thinking how strange it felt to live without expecting a door to slam or a voice to erupt. Freedom felt both expansive and unfamiliar, like stepping into a room I had been locked outside of for years. Somewhere in that internal recalibration, I understood something that had been waiting to surface. I did not cut him off to punish him. I cut him off to stop punishing myself. Saying it aloud in my living room made the air shift. My career continued to accelerate in ways that required concentration. One morning, my team lead pulled me aside with a request. There was a developing situation overseas, sensitive and politically fragile, and they needed someone to draft the initial concept of operations. It was the kind of assignment that meant long hours, meticulous planning, and no room for ego. I spent the next 3 days moving between classified briefing rooms, liaising with analysts, legal advisors, and liaison officers from partner nations. The mission parameters were complex and volatile, but I found myself sinking into the work easily, the way some people slip into prayer. In those rooms, there was no father reducing my accomplishments to paperwork, no voice mocking the uniform I wore. There were only problems to solve, lives to protect, and a chain of command that valued precision. On the fourth evening after I finally submitted the draft, my phone buzzed while I was rinsing dishes. A message from my mother. I froze for a beat before opening it. It was short. VFW voted today. They removed your dad from leadership. Call if you want. I stared at the words. A version of me from years ago might have felt triumphant or vindicated, even victorious that the community he worshipped had finally taken something away from him. But the person I was now did not feel triumph. I felt a quiet settling, like dust finally landing on a surface that had been shaking too long. I typed back a neutral thank you and set the phone down. Then I leaned against the counter and let the silence return. For once, the consequences were his to carry, not mine to hide. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was reviewing an updated threat matrix for the Joint Ops team. My phone lit up with a number that should not have been allowed anywhere near my screen. For a moment, I simply stared at it, feeling that familiar hitch in my chest, the one that used to signal danger, or orders, or both. Then I answered, because avoiding it would have felt like giving him control he no longer had any right to. His voice did not land the way it used to. It was not the booming command of a gunnery sergeant who believed the world owed him obedience. It was rough around the edges, shaky in places, the kind of tone that belonged to a man who had lost more ground in a month than he had in decades. "They are overreacting," he said, like the restraining order, the VFW vote, and the internal review were nothing but minor inconveniences he could steamroll through if only I would fall back in line. You know how these things go. Someone gets dramatic. Someone complains too much. You can fix it. The arrogance in the last line felt almost nostalgic in a twisted way, as if he was trying on an old coat that no longer fit, but refused to accept the sleeves had shrunk. I kept my voice level. "You are not supposed to be calling me." He ignored the warning entirely, powering forward with the same entitlement he used when I was 10, and he barked orders from the garage. "You made this mess, Kara. At least help clean it up." "I made you." The words that used to crush me now felt like items on a checklist, bullet points in a briefing where I had already written the conclusion. I let him finish the sentence, even though every syllable sounded like a demand, masked as fatherhood. His tone shifted again, dipping into something like pleading, but wrapped tightly with expectation. "The VFW wants a statement. They are talking about removing my membership. That is 30 years of service. 30! You think I'm going to let that disappear because you got sensitive?" Sensitive. A word he used any time I tried to express discomfort, or set a boundary, or even breathe in a way he did not approve of. I realized in that moment he had no concept of the difference between consequences and punishment. He thought everything was just another battle to bully his way through. I took a breath so slow it felt deliberate. The kind they taught us in Intel, when preparing to deliver bad news to a commander who might not take it well. He kept talking, piling blame and self-pity on top of each other. "You owe me that much, after everything I did. After everything I gave you. I gave you the tools to survive that Navy of yours. I made you tough. I made you who you are." The old version of me might have folded under that weight, might have tried to soften the blow, or make the moment easier for him, even as it cut into me. But the person standing in that quiet apartment with classified documents still open on the table was not the child he trained to obey. I had spent years learning to separate truth from narrative, fact from the fiction people tell themselves to stay comfortable. Internally, the thought formed with clinical precision. He gave me DNA and trauma. The rest, I built myself. Out loud, I offered a different version: steady, professional, clear. "The only thing I am going to fix is the part of this story I still control. And that is me." He went silent long enough that I wondered whether the line had dropped. Then he exhaled sharply, the sound of a man realizing the door he always assumed would open for him was finally locked. "You will regret this," he said. But the threat had no teeth, no volume, no authority, just a hollow echo of someone losing control of the narrative. I ended the call before he could speak again. My hands did not shake. My breath did not hitch. Instead, a kind of calm settled over me, the same kind that came after a successful operation when every piece of information aligned exactly where it should. I set the phone down, opened a new document on my laptop, and wrote a short summary of the incident. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer and the JAG contact with a simple note that he had violated the restraining order. No emotion, no commentary, just procedure. The law existed to protect people exactly in moments like this, and I was not going to let his desperation make me sloppy. When I closed my laptop, the apartment felt unusually quiet, like the air itself was taking in the shift. It surprised me that I did not feel triumph, or anger, or satisfaction. What I felt was confirmation. A clean line drawn where there had never been one before. He had reached for control out of habit and found nothing to grab. As I stood there in the half-light of the room, a truth surfaced with the clarity of a debrief summary. He thought I would break ranks for him. What he did not understand was that he was no longer in my chain of command. The invitation showed up in my inbox on a bland Wednesday afternoon, tucked between a logistics update and a weather advisory, like it was not about to rewire something fundamental in my head. Joint Briefing and Recognition Event, Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado. Senior Leadership, liaison officers, and representatives from several veteran organizations would be present. They wanted me to present lessons learned from a recent operation, the one that had kept me awake for weeks while we shaped and reshaped every branch of the decision tree. I stared at the subject line for a long moment, aware of how far it was from a folding chair in a living room on Christmas, and clicked open. The agenda attached listed my name near the end, slotted between a panel on interagency coordination and closing remarks. My title sat there in clean black text, formal and detached, but I felt the weight of what it represented in a way I never had before. The day of the event, the sky over Coronado was a clear, relentless blue, the kind that made the water look almost unreal. I wore my uniform with the same care I always did, but that morning every ribbon, every pin felt less like decoration and more like documentation. My hair had grown out enough to frame my face, short and neat by regulation. Not a reminder of humiliation, but a choice I had made with my own reflection in mind. Walking into the auditorium, I clocked the usual details out of habit: where the exits were, which rows were filled with command staff and which with guests. A cluster of older men in jackets with veteran patches sat together near the middle, their posture familiar in a way I could feel without looking directly at them. One of the event coordinators whispered that representatives from several local veteran posts were there, including the VFW. I felt something flicker under my breastbone and then settle. Somewhere in this room, there were people who knew my father as Gunny Dalton, the loud storyteller who loved to talk about discipline and toughness. For once, that fact did not make me shrink. It made me stand a little straighter. The event moved in measured segments. A commander spoke about partnership. Another officer walked through casualty statistics and the way new protocols were lowering them. I sat in the second row, hands folded loosely, listening with one part of my mind while another traced the road that had led here. A girl in Escondido doing push-ups in the yard so her father would stop shouting. A young woman at OCS learning that orders could be firm without being cruel. An intelligence officer in a windowless room building plans that would carry men like Mason into and out of danger. My name was called near the end, the lights adjusted just enough to sharpen the stage. The moderator, a captain with a voice made for microphones, read from a small card. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Kara Dalton, United States Navy Intelligence. She was the lead architect on an operation that prevented a mass casualty event overseas last year. There was a small shift in the room, the kind of subtle attention that comes when people understand they are about to hear from someone who has been sitting closer to the core of things than most. They did not need details. They only needed to understand the scale. Prevented a mass casualty event was enough. I walked to the podium, feeling the distance between the carpet and my shoes, every step anchored and deliberate. For a second, as my fingers touched the sides of the lectern, another image flashed over the scene, as vivid as if it were being projected onto the back wall. A sagging armchair wrapped in Christmas lights, a tangle of hair on a living room floor, my father standing over me with clippers and a beer bottle on the table. Sit still. Marines do not cry over hair. The memory flickered and then receded, replaced by rows of uniforms and faces turned toward me, waiting. My voice came out steady, amplified but calm. I began the way they had asked, walking through the framework of the operation. I spoke about information flow, about the importance of building redundancy into communication, about how critical it was to respect the limitations of the people executing the plan while still expecting excellence. I described how our team had modeled civilian patterns around the target area and how that had changed the timing of the mission. I never mentioned names or locations, only principles and outcomes. Still, you could feel the room following every word. As I moved from tactical points to broader themes, I felt an old pressure rise. The instinct to apologize for taking up space, for sounding confident, for existing in a position my father believed did not belong to someone like me. I did not obey it. Instead, I let the talk shift from pure intel to something wider. Discipline is a word we use a lot in rooms like this, I said, letting the microphone carry the line to the back rows. We use it when we talk about training and command and standards. For a long time, I thought discipline was something that happened to you, something other people enforced. It took me years to understand that real discipline is about owning your actions, not other people's bodies. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. I had not said his name. I had not described the Christmas chair, or the sound of clippers, or the way laughter had felt like a weapon. I did not need to. The people in that room, especially the older ones with their own ghosts, knew exactly what I meant. Some flinched, almost imperceptibly. Others nodded like they had seen the difference play out in their own homes, their own communities. I went on, weaving the lesson into the fabric of the mission. The team I worked with succeeded because every man on the ground owned his piece of the plan. No one tried to dominate through fear. No one treated another person's body as a prop to prove a point. Respect is not a slogan. It is the difference between lives lost and lives saved. When I finished, there was a breath. A small, held moment where I could feel the room exhale as one. Then the applause started. Not polite and quick, but rising, steady. People stood. The front row, then the middle, then the back. A standing ovation. I had watched crowds stand for other people before, for generals and decorated heroes, and men whose stories my father loved to repeat. I had never been the reason chairs scraped and bodies lifted. As they applauded, I did not think about rank or evaluation reports. I thought about 13-year-old me, hair falling around my sneakers, silently promising that one day I would be the one giving orders. Somewhere in the cluster of veterans, a man in a VFW blazer made his way forward when the applause finally ebbed. He had the lined face and clear eyes of someone who had seen more than he would ever say out loud. He waited until I stepped off the stage, then held out his hand. Gunny talked a lot about raising a warrior, he said quietly enough that only I heard it. He left out the part where you outranked his example. The words landed with a weight that had nothing to do with ego, and everything to do with reclaiming something that had been twisted for years. I shook his hand, feeling the roughness of his grip, and nodded once. "Thank you," I said, and meant more than just the courtesy. Later, as I sat back down and another speaker took the stage, the noise of the room faded into a low hum. My heart was beating slower than it had during my first briefing as an officer, my breathing controlled, my shoulders loose. For 28 years, my father was the loudest voice in my head. That day, other voices finally drowned him out. 1 year later, the air in my apartment carried the quiet warmth of a Christmas I had built with my own hands. The small tree in the corner glowed softly with white lights, steady and calm, nothing like the tangled, multicolor strands that used to flicker in my childhood living room. A few ornaments swung gently near the window where the ocean breeze drifted in. I had invited a handful of people, the ones who made the last 12 months feel survivable in ways I never expected. Mason stood near the kitchen counter, laughing at something one of the junior officers said. His voice relaxed without the sharp edges that came with deployment work. 2 colleagues from Intel were setting out plates of cookies someone had brought. There was no shouting, no tension humming under the surface, no unpredictable shifts in tone that made you brace for impact. The quiet was not fragile. It was chosen. I stepped away for a moment into the hallway and caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. My hair was short and clean, a style I picked because it fit my face and my profession, not because someone forced it onto me as a punishment. I reached up and touched it, letting the truth settle against my fingertips. This is mine. This is chosen. For most of my life, safety had meant predicting someone else's mood, measuring my words like an explosive grid pattern, trying to keep the peace in a house where peace never really existed. Tonight, safety meant standing in a space without fear, surrounded by people who did not need to control me to feel whole. It was startling how different that felt. I walked back into the living room carrying a tray of mugs. No alcohol, just spiced tea and ginger drinks and coffee. Warm, steady liquids for a warm, steady night. The kind of Christmas I never realized I wanted until the opposite of it had carved itself into my memory. Conversation rose and fell in gentle waves. Someone teased Mason about wearing a button-down instead of a tactical shirt. He rolled his eyes and muttered that civilian clothes should come with instructions. Everyone laughed. I did too. When the group settled into small clusters, I stepped onto the small balcony outside my living room. The view was not dramatic, just a slice of ocean in the distance and the steady glow of Coronado streets below. But the air smelled like salt and freedom and something else I had learned to name only recently. Peace. My phone buzzed on the patio table. A new email notification appeared on the lock screen. The sender marked with the familiar government domain. For a moment, I simply looked at it. A year ago, emails from higher headquarters filled me with adrenaline. Tonight, the vibration felt like a tap on the shoulder, not a demand. I opened it. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. They wanted me to join a developing working group, focused on strategic coordination for joint operations. A step higher, a wider scope, a seat at a table I had once assumed belonged to people older and louder than me. They asked if I was interested. The choice felt like the important part. For so long in my childhood, choices were illusions. Everything bent toward my father's temper or away from it. My hair, my clothes, my tone, my plans, my presence in a room. Tonight, the question in the email sat there quietly, with no shadow behind it. Do you want this? I did not answer right away. Not out of fear, but out of something steadier. I was no longer running from something. I was moving toward something. And that meant choosing deliberately. Inside the apartment, someone changed the music to something soft and old-fashioned. A few lights blinked from the tree. I heard Mason call out that dessert was ready, even though none of us remembered who was supposed to bring dessert. I smiled without thinking. Another notification buzzed. This one was from my mother. A simple digital Christmas card. On the front, a generic picture of a wreath. Inside, a typed message that read, I hope you are doing well. Your father mentions you sometimes. Stay safe. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a sentence that floated somewhere between guilt and distance. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I saved it to a folder. The same folder where I kept the restraining order, the photo of my shaved head from that night, and the timeline I built when I finally admitted what had been happening my entire life. I did not keep these things to hold on to the past. I kept them to remember the road I had walked away from, to remember that leaving was not betrayal, it was survival. And rebuilding was not weakness, it was command. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and leaned against the balcony railing, letting the ocean breeze touch the back of my neck. Below me, the street was quiet. Behind me, there was laughter, low and warm. The kind of sound that never once existed in the house where I grew up. I breathed in, slow and deep. My father once used clippers to prove he owned me, that I was an extension of his will, not a person with a will of my own. But now, every inch of my life, my hair, my home, my future, was signed under one name. Mine. I picked up the mug of tea I had left on the table, still warm enough to sip, and looked out toward the water again. Somewhere in the world, another operation was forming. Another briefing was being drafted. Another team was preparing for a night that might change everything. Maybe I would help shape it. Maybe I would choose something entirely different. Either way, the decision belonged to me now. Behind me, someone opened the balcony door. Kara, dessert before Mason eats all of it. I turned and laughed, stepping back into the glow of the room. Peace is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a small apartment, a short haircut, a cup of tea, and a life rebuilt from the inside out. If any part of this felt a little too familiar, you are not alone. Tell me where you are watching from, and whether you would ever cut someone out of your life to save your own peace.